Good morning. I know there's some people around the corner there. This is a very brief period of time for such a large topic, as you already know. And the talk I'm going to give today is not the talk I was thinking about when I went to bed last night. That's always a dilemma. I woke up thinking about a movie I saw a long time ago called The Shawshank Redemption with Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. And the most powerful line in that movie to me was, and still is, it's a terrible thing to live in fear. And so let's not live there. So this talk is an introduction on how to practice so that we are not living in fear. But first, the poem. Kind of. I will write a poem, maybe, if I can catch one as it comes by, like a bird catches the wind. To be raised up, to trust implicitly, to be sustained in a little act of daring. Yesterday at 2:35 a.m., there was a large goose standing on the deck right there at the edge of the lake, calling, talking, squawking, sound making, and trusting implicitly in this little act of daring. Some distance apart, another geese who had been silent but looking, noticing, watching, and standing nearby started talking too. For something or for nothing, but just trusting implicitly in this little act of daring. I will write a poem, maybe, if my heart can catch one, as it comes by like a bird catches the wind. To be raised up, to trust implicitly in this little act of daring. If we had Wi-Fi here, I would play a song for you written based on a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's called Call Me by My True Names. And fortunately, I brought a copy, and Shane knows how to sing it. And some of the others of you also may know this song. If you don't know this song or this poem, please find that poem. Understand it's a practice poem. It's not just an expression to be a poem. It's a way of practicing with our experience of being human, which is complicated and often profoundly frustrating, which I know you've noticed. So, Shane, where are you? Somewhere. Oh, there you are. Great. Thank you.
So, if you know it, please do sing along. My joy is like a spring so warm, it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the four oceans. call me by my true names, so that I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and the door of my heart could be left open. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and the door of my heart could be left open.
Thank you, Shane. So you can find this online if you'd like to listen to it. It's being sung by monks and nuns and lay people associated with Thich Nhat Hanh in Plum Village. You can also find it in a book of Thich Nhat Hanh's poems that he wrote a long time ago in Vietnam called Call Me by My True Names. You can also, of course, Google it and get a copy of just the words of the poem itself. To deal is interesting in Buddhist scholarship. There are many things that are listed as afflictions. Fear is not one of them. So I went through my little library of Mahayana text and Theravada text and Tibetan text, and I was looking for, and no one in any of those traditions has identified fear as an obstacle to our enlightenment. So I was like, well, what's up with that? Right? How could this be? And then I came across a collection of teachings of the Buddha called the Numerical Discourses. And this is an organization of the talks the Buddha gave based on numbers, numerology. So in this collection of talks or sutras, when the Buddha talked about one of these, there's a whole group of all the ones, and then as he talked about two of these, and each chapter is a collection of ones, twos, threes, etc., different teachings, organized by number. And so this morning I want to introduce you to two things, and one is the four powers. This is in the fourth section, right? The chapter on force. And there's four powers that are important in calling things by their true names, so that we can create the space inside of ourselves not to be in a battle with ourselves. The battle between fear and non-fear. The battle between sorrow and happiness. We could go on the battle between black and white. I mean, let's get real. Young and old. DNR. I don't think everybody got that, but what's to me so important is those battles at one level are all the same battle. It is the battle of dualism. It is the battle of misunderstanding what discrimination really means in terms of practice. That is wisdom, discerning what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I want to come back to that. But the language of perfuming that was in the flyer that you may have seen, that language comes from the Yogacara tradition of Buddhism. And there, which is just a wonderful group of crazy people from several hundred years ago who put this all together. Now, over 1,000 years ago, probably. Anyway, they have a model of human consciousness. And this is the basic model in Buddhist psychology that Thich Nhat Hanh and other teachers like to use. Human consciousness has, in this model, 8 levels. And of course, in Buddhism, 100 years later, somebody goes, oh, there must be 9. Because the Buddhists love to debate, add on, analyze, blah, blah, blah. But what's important, this model, people misunderstand this model. This model isn't meant to be some final ontological summation of what it means to be conscious. This model and all models in Buddhism are to help us practice. Otherwise, in my view, what good are they? If I can't figure out how to come home to myself, where I can have the space inside of myself for my joys and pain to be one, what good is a model? So this model is a tool, not some final summary of anything. Now, as a tool, it says it divides our mind into, and this is like the Cliff Notes version, because otherwise my wife is over here and she'll have the hook coming out in about 45 minutes saying, you're running out of time. Actually, Come and Children has a book with that title. And I think she's right. We are running out of time to grow up. One of the dilemmas I have in giving talks like this is I make these notes, and then they're not the notes I wake up with. And then I bring these notes, and it's not the talk I give. But that's okay. So, in this model, simple version, our living mind, this is our conscious mind, hopefully, where we're most aware of our thoughts. You know, this is our thinking mind. This is our mind that brings order to our life. Then there's our depth mind. And in this model, our depth mind is full of metaphorical seeds. And here, seeds means impressions, tendencies, conditioning. And this conditioning is connected to our individual experience. Every experience we have posits a seed, adds a seed, or reinforces a seed. And the image of seed here is agricultural because it's meant to communicate potentiality. And our depth mind is full of potential manifestations, potential thoughts, potential actions, potential behaviors. So we all have experiences around that create seeds for us. I checked the news this morning, and I check the news every day as a part of my practice. And it's not easy, as you know, to practice with what we are told is the news. So every week every morning I've been getting up early checking in on Standing Rock. Because we have some order members and some Sangha friends who are there, who've been there for several weeks, sending us updates and photos. And do you know there are like thousands and thousands of people there from all over the world? Yes. And do you know you can barely find any coverage? Now why would that be? Well, that would be, in my opinion, which in this case doesn't intend to be humble. Because we live in a culture that pretends there are no Native American people in this society. And so, of course, that's been reflected in the news. This is how seeds work. Our tendencies, our potentials, our habit energies, all stored down here. So our seeds aren't just individual, they're also collective. And our seeds are transmitted to us not just by our personal experiences, but by our families, by our societies, by history, our histories, and by humanity itself. What does that mean? That means in the depth mind of every human being, there is the possibility for love and hate and joy and sadness and happiness and growing up and not growing up. All the seeds of the entire human species, the potentials, the impulses, lie in our depth consciousness. So many of us have gone through our life not realizing we have this underground, this undercurrent, this basement. But this basement, the quality of our life is determined by the quality of these seeds. And so to understand your fear is a seed down here. Okay? And I was on the phone last night with a dear friend from our Sangha in Whitby who's passing away. And at least she thinks she's passing away. She's close, but not as close as she thinks. So every time I get in touch with her, she wants to say, well, give me a meditation to help me pass away. And I say, you're not ready to pass away yet, or you wouldn't be asking this question. Okay, so I told Peggy last night, I need to record these. I'm like making up these great meditations to die. I should like save them for myself. So like, boy, that was helpful. Our seeds down here of fear are conditioned. It doesn't come from nowhere. So last night she was talking to me about, and every conversation I've had and Peggy have had with her recently has been around fear. And how can I practice with fear? And she told me last night there's less fear. As she's been practicing, less and less fear is coming up. And she told me last night there's still a little left. So I said, well, that's okay. It means you're still alive. And that's why fear is not an affliction. It is an energy connected to our very aliveness. It is not our enemy. It is an experience of being human. And Thich Nhat Hanh and other teachers have often said there are two difficulties in healing and transforming ourselves, and I want to focus this in on healing and transforming fear. The first one is our view. In some Buddhist circles, what here is our knowledge of ourselves and the narrative we have about ourselves and about the nature of reality imprisons us. So not only am I experiencing fear, I then build a cage for myself. I thought I built, this is funny, right? I thought I was building a wall to keep you out. But I discovered I'm in the wall. I have trapped myself. I have imprisoned myself by my view of what it means to be a human being. So that's the first obstacle to healing and transforming our fear, is our perception of it, our view of it. The second is habit energy. And habit energy here is about, here's a Buddhist technical term, both are, but formations. You've heard of mental formations? Well, the mental formations also include what's called mental fabrications. I like that. Because what that means is I cannot experience, let's say I'm having an experience of fear. I was driving in Seattle this week, coming, and this is after the morning I read about another black guy being killed by police. The reasons for me are irrelevant. Because whatever the reasons are, my experience is the same. I'm feeling targeted. Right? So I know how to practice with that. I'm practicing with that. I can feel that starting to come up. But thanks to the practice, before it gets to my mind, I can turn it back. And then I can take that same energy that came up as fear and open it up. I can open it. And what I mean by that is I do not have to define myself by that experience. That's just a part of my experience. It's not the summation of who and what I am, or who and what I might be afraid of. That's not a summation of that person or situation either. So our views keep us in prison. And the key to this is understanding, I'll come back to this with power. Let me go into this formation, this habit energy is around our wounds. So one challenge to transforming our fear into love is our view of fear itself, and of course our view of love. And I'm not, as you can imagine, I'm not referring to People magazine love here. I'm talking about profound love as it's referred to in the Brahmaviharas, the four divine dwellings of the mind, of loving kindness, of sympathetic joy, of shared joy, mudita. We have some friends who helped us move to Vashon, who are both here, and friends from California who helped us. They are so happy. Our friends from California, they sent us, they opened an account for us at Snapdragon. Snapdragon, the restaurant, the really good bakery. Which one of my practices is to make sure I don't go there every day. Practice is always concrete, or it's not practice. It's just thinking about practice. And if you're just thinking about practice, it will not heal you. If you're just thinking about practice, it will not transform your suffering. So on this side is our more emotional wounds. But over here, we have fears that come from our ancestors. We have fears that we weren't even there when that fear came to be, but it was passed on. And now there's more and more research, neuroscientifically and genetically. We're starting to learn of what we pass on. Right? And it's astounding just what little we know now. We know, for example, that patterns of abuse go 3 generations unless they're transformed. We know some and other kinds of patterns in our family lineage get passed on. But some of the most cutting edge research is what is passed on emotionally. This is just now starting to, and Dan Siegel's done some work on this, some other people have done some work on this, and the neuroscience of interpersonal connections between generations and one another. And so a fear may come up in you that's not yours. What is the note I made for myself? Oh, here it is. Over here, this view and knowledge and perception concerns what in Buddhism is called cognitive error. In a short phrase, we're like really confused about the true nature of things. And that true nature starts with understanding the true nature of ourselves, our own human experience. And over here, on the habit energy side, the formation side, our dilemma is we think we own our experience. So my fear, my anger, my sadness, my sorrow, my divorce, my baby, my mother, my father, my car, all of these things are on loan. And to think you own them is to create perfect suffering. If you want, it's entirely up to you. Well, part of what I like about mental fabrication, when I studied and practiced with this, with a Taiwanese master, what I started to realize is you can do something that will trigger an experience in me. Let's say I'm getting upset. But that can't happen without me participating in it. Oh. And once I saw that, and I learned this early in my life out of just survival. I didn't know this what I was learning when I grew up in the ghetto of Cleveland. But I learned that I participate in my own emotional and perceptive life. And that gives me freedom. We participate in our own fear. We help create it. We help call it to be. And as we do that, we perfume our mind with fear. I love the Yogacara insight in that every seed, every impulse, every energy in our depth mind comes from having been perfumed. When I was growing up, which is a long time ago, in one way, there used to be a cartoon called Pepe Le Pew. Okay, and so there's this skunk who catches this scent of this like poor cat. And he thinks this cat is a skunk. And every time he floats, when he smells the perfume of the cat, he just... This reminds me of the way some people are going through their life today. Perfumed by hate, by ignorance, by confusion, by the addiction to disagreement. You know, you can be addicted to disagreement. All right, in some ways, this is the shadow of our political system. So we disagree, so we keep forgetting we're on a ship, okay, that has a finite life, and that is influenced by the waves and the winds of the ocean. And we are just so addicted to disagreeing, we don't see the iceberg. We don't have a long-term view. We're caught in the moment of our emotional addictions to interacting with ourselves and with one another. at the bottom here of these two, what sustains both of these is belief in a separate self. Now, this is very confusing for Westerners. You know, we went through the Enlightenment and we have all this individuation stuff, which is wonderful. But that's not what self means in Buddhism. People spend 100 years misunderstanding what self means in Buddhism. What self means in Buddhism is my unskillfulness. So I had one teacher say, you know, if I collected all my unskillfulness and set it on the table, then I should call that table the table that holds myself. It has nothing to do with being an individual. It's a complete misunderstanding of what the teaching of Buddhism is about self. This is belief in self. This is, I mentioned this yesterday to a group, this is Miss Piggy, where everything is about moi. Okay, and if moi doesn't feel like I'm at the center of the narrative, then that narrative can't have value. And this is why we can't see Standing Rock on the news, because moi is not at the center of it. Okay? And in classical Buddhist, this is called eye-making. We make an eye. So you can start to see the chest beating going on in wherever you want to look. There's a lot of that going around. With no consciousness whatsoever to the depth level, or what's motivating it, what's conditioning it. And this is why we practice. Not so that we come out to be perfect people. That would be horrible and completely boring. We practice so we can be alive and awake to the miracle of our own life, which is a lived experience and not an ideology. It's a lived experience and not a religion. So it's entirely possible to go into a zendo anywhere in the world and sit perfectly in the meditation posture and get up and walk out and be the same asshole you were before you went in.
Oh.
Okay, you should. Sorry, but I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm getting old, so I don't have time to be nice. Yeah, I know. And, you know, it shocked some people. I had somebody come. I've never heard a Dharma teacher say that word. Well, get used to it.
We're in the 21st century.
Okay, here we go. Belief in self. Meaning, here. The idea that I am a separate self, which is absolutely preposterous. I mean, any way you want to look at it, you can look at it like biologically. You know, if I didn't have parents, probably wouldn't be here. Look at it ecologically. If the earth and the sun and the moon and the waters and the trees did not support our existence, we would not be here. Now, so you can look at what the Buddhist term emptiness from a very functional point of view. In 4 ways, and this begins to break you out of the prison of your view of fear. So let's look at fear. Fear is impermanent. It doesn't last forever. It's like everything else in life. It comes, it rises, it has a peak, and it fades away unless you hold on to it to define yourself. Unless you build a monument to it and invite the neighbors over to see the edifice of your suffering. This is our participation in creating our own suffering. Or to practice. Understand how your fear has been conditioned. What conditions contribute to your own experience of fear? So I've been working on this a long time. Okay? And it wasn't because I thought I was going to get enlightened. It's because I got to survive in this society. So I've not had the luxury of ignoring my conditioning around fear. Because I'm still safe. I'm still alive. And that's not true with a lot of the people I grew up with. So I learned early, thanks to a lot of support and a lot of people, to get in touch and understand that my fear is conditioned. It is not ultimate. So you can actually do a little workshop with yourself. Where is fear? Where is the fear in your ancestry? And everybody has to do this. There's some idea that the race issue in America is a black people's problem. It's like, what? You got to be kidding me. How is that possible? I gave a talk, which upset some people, I think, but that's not my problem. Because I said, anybody who thinks only African Americans have been traumatized by slavery do not understand what it means to be a human being. We have all been traumatized. And we don't have to do the slavery thing. We can do how we've treated and continue to treat our indigenous brothers and sisters. And I'm traumatized by that. I watched Standing Rock every day last week in the morning for half an hour, and I cried every morning. Because I found in that suffering my own. I found in that disregard my own. But I also found profound inspiration. It was incredible. I was so inspired. I was practically dancing in the air, watching people from the tribes gather like they haven't gathered in years. And not only that, people are starting to come from around the world. And someone pointed out, boy, if you start to put together all these dynamics that are going on right now, people have no idea what's happening. I just think it's amazing. It's like there's a tsunami rising up from healing and transformation of ourselves. And I'm not going to tell anybody ahead of time. Because when it hits the shore at a party, my grandmother would say, it's all over but the shouting. There is a profound shift happening in our understanding of what it means to be human. And it's come through our suffering. In spite of our suffering. So this is not an encouragement to suffer. That would be another misunderstanding of the Buddhist tradition. What causes your fears? What causes you to be afraid? And this is all about practicing. You do a meditation for yourself. Do an exercise for you. Do a little self-workshop. Practice reflection, which is also not one of the high arts of American culture. Reflect. Develop the reflective skills so you can look at your own life. You can come home to yourself and be okay at home with yourself. There's a recent study out last week on tiredness, exhaustion. Over 100,000 people were interviewed surveyed around the world, and who thought they weren't getting enough rest. And what the research showed is actually most people could use a little more sleep, but the number one reason they were exhausted is they didn't have any alone time. Okay, now don't run out and head for the hills all by yourself. Because in the Buddhist teaching, there's a sutra which we want to teach sometime called A Better Way to Live Alone. This is how to be with ourselves as individuals, how to be with our consciousness, how to be with the ebb and flow of being awake, and then the next day I don't feel so awake. That's all fine. There's nothing wrong with our experience of being human. It's how we relate to it, individually and collectively, is what the teachings are all about. So there's 4 powers. Where are they? Here they are. There are 4 powers. And if you practice, and you have all these already, okay? So this is not shopping. Okay, you don't have to go to a network to get this. You already have all these 4 powers in your depth mind. And in your living mind. So it's just all a degree of strength. But you have these energies within you. And the first one, the first power is the aspiration for the mind of love. Develop this aspiration in yourself. And the more you cultivate the seed of the mind of love within you, the more you do that, the less fear you will have. And I'm speaking from my experience here. Actually, I made a list in case somebody were to ask me, how did you go from fear to love? That's one of the ways. I cultivate in myself the mind of love. And here's a practice, and you can find this practice across Buddhist traditions as a whole. I practice cultivating the mind of love by getting in touch with my own goodness. So we did a retreat in Plum Village over 20 years ago with Thich Nhat Hanh before he was popular. And we did a lot of detailed work and reflection. Writing and sitting and walking. And one of the things one of our exercises was we all had to write down our goodness. What goodness did we receive from our ancestors? You should know this, because it's there. What goodness have you received from your ancestors? What gifts? What talents? What insights? What energy? What wisdom? Because we need all that now. That doesn't need to be back there. It needs to be where it is, which is present in you. Now together we learn how to create the next symphony of our ancestry in this century. That's never been created before. And to me, wow, that's cool. That's exciting. So your own goodness. Second, cultivate awareness of the goodness of others. It could be a little more difficult. But also depends on your view of others. You know, this is the glass half full, half empty scenario, or in business, theory X versus theory Y. The employees who you can't trust and you have to watch all the time because they're going to do something really bad and destroy your company. Or theory Y, people are motivated, you can trust, they can make decisions, etc. But that's in our mind. That's our dichotomy thinking. So it's like, oh, so all the people who were involved, many of the people who were involved in the 2008 debacle on Wall Street were all good guys. we thought. I never thought that, but a lot of people did, because I used to work at a bank. Okay, so that's not the goodness I'm talking about. I'm not talking about portrayed goodness. I'm talking about the goodness in our hearts, and in our minds, and in our kindness, and in our thoughtfulness. Nourish that. Find that. Get close to that. And if you can't get close to that, move. Because we are running out of time. Next, know the goodness, that goodness can exist between us. Oh boy, if we could just break through there. Because when I look at the state of the world, is a fundamental view that it is not possible for goodness to exist between us. In terms of the narrative we are fed, the story that we are being given. But I have lived and worked all over the world in many places, and that is not my experience. My experience is there is plenty of good between us, and that we can do phenomenal things, and it never gets covered. If the world was as bad as some people are suggesting, we would already be out of existence. That's my proof we're all still here. In the Hebraic tradition, there's a term for a group of the righteous who work 24/7, pray 24/7, practice 24/7. It is because of their continuous prayer and practice that society continues to move and evolve, heal, and transform. We need to understand that about ourselves as human beings. There are people praying all over this planet, people working diligently, kindness all over. Yeah, there's war, but kindness doesn't get coverage. Right? Being together in ways that are helpful does not get covered. And we do this so we can be released from fear. So as we do these 4 powers, let me just repeat them again for those who are note people. 1, aspiration to the mind of love. 2, develop a meditative, contemplative life. Develop a practice. And if it's not this practice, do another one. I don't care. All I'm saying is we cannot wake up to this level of our consciousness and learn how to manage it helpfully without a contemplative life. Because it's only in a contemplative life that we can start to realize what's under the surface. Otherwise, we're just caught in the drama of someone else's construction of what it means to be human. So it's like, okay, I may be wrong, but it's me and I'm not confused about being wrong.
Yeah, right on.
Okay? I did a talk in Columbus, Ohio, under the category of America's karma, and on race and our dysfunctionality and our potential. And at the end, this guy comes up to me and he says, so I said, okay, we're living in a construct that somebody else created. So I think he was some professor or something, but anyway, I said, who decided you were white? It's like silence in the room. It's like, who decided I was black? I mean, I was teaching at Claremont Graduate University in the education department with school teachers and helping them understand the conditioning of their children that came to them. And one of the things there's like total startledness. We live in constructs that were invented. And as it used to be on the Wayne Brothers show, homie, don't play that. I create my own constructs. I will interact with all the other constructs, but we should all know self-created and others are all constructs. They're all human inventions. Necessary, sometimes helpful, sometimes not. But they are not absolute reality. This is back to view. Learning this. Number in meditation and contemplative practice is how you begin to understand your conditioning around constructs. Your conditioning around, okay, well, you can have this feeling, but you can't have that one. No, you can smile at this person, but you can't smile at that person. It's all conditioning. You can feel safe here, but you can't feel safe there. At one time in my life, I was working on some village development projects in the state of Maharashtra in India. I was there for several years, and we were out going to meet a group of village leaders to discuss doing a socioeconomic development project. And so when we did this, we would if the village agreed, we'd have a whole process of people participating and creating a vision and strategies, and then we would have people go live in that village for 2 years to support the process and to link them to the services which they were disconnected from. And we were driving and we drove to a bridge, and we realized there's a riot on the other side of the bridge between Hindus and Muslims were fighting. Village stuff, right? No big national thing, just village stuff. And people had real swords. So the guy next to me goes, I think those are real swords. They're really big. So we sat in the car in our little, you've seen these in the movies, the little three-wheeler things. So we're sitting here, and one of my friends who's passed away now, he goes, you think we should go into that? And I was like, well, the village is waiting on us. We had an appointment. And this was an Adivasi village, an indigenous village in India. And so we drove through the riot. And people were so startled to see two white guys and me driving through. They just stopped fighting. It was great. 3, a lifestyle of mindful living is a power. Third power. So design your life so you have time to wake up. Part 1. Part 2, design your life so you have time to help other people wake up. Serve is what I'm talking about. And Mother Teresa had a great quote about this. The task isn't to do big things. The task is to do small things with great love. So, we have all these images of what heroes are and what heroines are, and we forget to help somebody cross the street. We forget to coach a child in school. We forget the small things we can do to make a difference in other people's lives. And that's really aspiration, mind of love, developing a meditative practice, a lifestyle of mindful living, and the power of wisdom is the fourth power. And that's the power referred to in the opening stanza of the Heart Sutra. The Bodhisattva Avalokita was moving in a deep course of practice, down here. Okay, down deep practice, and realized that the 5 things we most associate with being human are all empty. The 5 skandhas, body, mind, and once that happened, she experienced freedom. All fear left. Fear is about vulnerability. Is the experience of vulnerability in part. And what I've started to learn is if I don't fight vulnerability, if I don't put myself in a ring with it, no fear. But the minute I put a box around us and lock myself into a battle to see who's going to win, I will tell you now who will win. Vulnerability will win, because vulnerability will use my own energy against me. So the way this perfuming process works is things in our depth mind come up to our surface mind, our living mind, and as thoughts, language, or speech, and actions. And every thought, every language, and every action perfumes the mind again. And now we have some initial research about this in neuroscience, even though some of the research that has been done started 50, 60 years ago. My favorite is a guy named Donald Hebb. So he has a model of our consciousness in terms of our brain cells. That every thought, every speech, and every action, for that to happen, neurons, our nerve cells, have to communicate with one another in our brain. And every time we do that same action, those same neurons communicate. It's like you create he called it a cell assembly in the brain. So there is neurological mirroring of this psychological process. That's why it's so hard to change. It's not just an idea. So try something simple. If you have a job, try going to work a different way. See how easy that is. See what comes up in you when you try to do something different. The next time you have a meal, eat with your opposite hand. See how easy that is. See what comes up. Shake it up is really all. And when we practice these four powers, in this discourse collection of the Buddhist teaching, we overcome 5 fears. Fear number 1, fear of livelihood. How many of us are just driven, wake up early, late, and nothing around us in our society, but this is true in other places. There are places in the world where, like, if you go to get a cup of coffee, it's like buying a car. It's like, oh, that'll be $7. Says, I just wanted a cup of coffee. I didn't want to make a major investment. So our livelihood is always feeling vulnerable. The second fear is fear of disrepute. I think that's a big fear in the U.S. that people don't talk about. I think if you look at U.S. culture and how it's evolved over time, one of the great fears in America is being shunned. Not being included. Being left out. People saying bad things about me. Right? So, like, I don't worry about any of that stuff. Because I've been living all that. I've trained myself how to deal with all that. But for anybody who hasn't trained themselves to deal with that, they're in a precarious situation at this very moment. Yes. Now, I just talked to some friends of mine who are like one of my bosses at the hospital where I used to work. She was brilliant. I would work for her anytime. And one of the things she used to say to me at least once a week, you do know there are good Republicans. And I'm one. And she was. But that was her language. But for somebody else looking at her, they wouldn't consider her a Republican. You see what I'm saying? Because of constructs. And she was phenomenal. Human being. Great leader. So, we have to be careful with our language and look deep. Right? We have to look deep. That's this fear. You know, if I don't fit in, what if people don't like me? I like over that. You can't grow up in Cleveland without getting over that. Not possible. Right? And you have your own story here. You go far back enough in your own lineage, go far back enough in your own heritage, and you will discover you have the same resources that are dormant for not being intimidated by what somebody else thinks about you. And so fear is not an obstacle to enlightenment in the teachings because it is fuel for enlightenment. It is energy for non-fear. People are like, well, how do I practice non-fear? Well, you can't practice non-fear without fear. No fight, no battle. It's just an energy allowing us to realize we are alive. And then if we don't construct monuments and other things to it, it just will flow by. It's real. Fear is a real experience. Right? Last thing I do to practice with fear. Every morning I practice the 5 remembrances. And a lot of people, the first time I said this to a group many years ago in a practice, they're like, oh man, that's a bummer. I am of a nature to grow old. I can't stop growing old. That's the first thing to remember. I do this every morning before I get out of bed, so I'm not confused completely. Second, I am of a nature to have ill health. There's no escape from having a body that's not permanent. It breaks down. Things go wrong. No escape from that. And every time I do that, when I first started doing this, giant fears would like leap up like movies. Third, I am of a nature to die. I cannot escape death. For everyone I love and everything I cherish is of a nature to change. I cannot escape being separated from them. And the fear comes and the anxiety comes up. And you breathe with that. Don't hold on. Just let it go. Let it pass through. That's what it's there for. To keep you awake and to let go, to release. And last, my actions are the ground on which I stand. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. What does that mean? That means that every act creates perfume. This is both a neurological statement and a psychological statement. Every action perfumes the world. And so I try to invite all of us to perfume the world with our basic goodness, with our capacity for love. In love in terms of inclusivity, but not inclusivity that is politically correct. I'm talking about inclusivity that can hold everything, including our own mess, our own sadness, our own fear, as well as our own hope, our own vision, our own change and transformation, what we have to give up to move to the next stage of our life and society. There's some giving up here, people. Giving up views and giving up emotional monuments to realize our true calling, which is to love.